Mandatory evacuation, you must leave.
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. The Bank of England has cut interest rates by another 0.25 percentage point, bringing down the cost of borrowing to 4.5%. But it's issued a warning on inflation and slashed its forecast for economic growth. The Prime Minister is under fire, but Keir Starmer says it will mean more money in people's pockets and says investment is at a 20-year high. President Trump has restated his controversial plan to move people from Gaza to develop a luxury Riviera as Benjamin Netanyahu welcomes the proposals. Hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with ConservativeHome's deputy editor, Henry Hill, and the associate political editor at the New Statesman, Rachel Cunliffe. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. Great to see you both. Well, let's take a quick look now to see what is on those front pages. Well, the Financial Times leads with the Bank of England cutting interest rates today and halving its growth estimate for this year in a blow to the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. The Express quotes a source describing the prospect for growth as putrid. In the wake of today's announcement, The Telegraph carries comments from the Bank of England Governor, Andrew Bailey, suggesting that the recruitment of 500,000 public sector workers since the pandemic has actually harmed the economy. The Mail believes the recent budget has put the economy in a state of stagflation. The Guardian has a similar message with the headline, Fears over stagnation as Reeves' growth plan suffers double blow. The Times also leads on potential difficulty for Rachel Reeves with the Bank of England's growth forecast possibly causing issues for the Chancellor. The Eye quotes Keir Starmer, who says the government will take tough decisions to boost growth. The Metro has the headline, Bedlocked, with the story of hospitals being overwhelmed by norovirus cases. The Sun has another exclusive interview with Liam Payne's girlfriend, with her revealing that the singer dreamed of a One Direction reunion. And the Star cites a study which found that lazy people live longer. Good for them. And we are joined tonight by Henry Hill and Rachel Cunliffe. Great to see you on a day where obviously a lot of the headlines are dominated by, I guess, two stories. One, the interest rate cuts, but then obviously this prediction, worrying prediction about the economic growth. Henry, why don't you start us, especially looking at the headline in the Financial Times?
Yeah, so essentially in November, the Bank of England forecast a growth rate for the British economy of 1.5%. Now it's cut that in half in just 3 months to 0.75%. Now that is incredibly bad news for the government because growth is effectively what generates tax receipts, right? All of the government's spending forecasts, which are already based on razor-thin margins, Rachel Reeves already having to ask departments to make 5% cuts, are based on forecast growth figures. So if those have been halved, that means that all over the government, they're going to have to go back, they're going to have to recalculate, they might have to make what Starmer says, even more tough decisions. And of course, it means, there's less money in everyone's pockets as well.
Rachel?
Well, I mean, yeah, you've got the government sort of pitched its whole strategy on growth. That was its election strategy. And then Rachel Reeves came in and was quite downbeat and said there had to be fine savings elsewhere, the £22 billion black hole, the inheritance, etc., had the budget, and it looked like the business response to all of that, both the negative outlook and to some of the measures in the budget, have been to go, not sure about that. And you're seeing the result of that hesitation in these figures. Now, it's important to say that since the start of the year, Rachel Reeves has sort of had a bit of a change in demeanour, change in attitude. She's been smiling.
She had a big speech just last week.
She had a big speech last week talking about growth. She went to Davos to sort of charm business leaders again. She was talking about Heathrow expansion. She was talking about the Oxford and Cambridge corridor that they want to build, sort of Silicon motorway valley,
Arc,
Silicon Arc, and all of these ideas that she believes will drive growth. But what these figures are suggesting is that some of the damage from the budget and from the initial messaging has already been done, and the projected growth rate has halved. It's kind of worth pointing out that it wasn't particularly high to start with. So growth sort of only just above standing still, and in some areas going backwards.
Yeah, and Henry, if we just have a look now at the front page of the Eye, new growth and inflation warning piles pressure on Reeves to boost flagging economy. I mean, it has to be said that there has been this interest rate cut, obviously great news for anyone with a tracker mortgage, and the whole point is to try to galvanise the economy a little. How much trouble do you think Rachel Reeves is in right now?
Yeah, the rate cut was done on a split decision at the Court of the Bank of England, which is, for the bank, relatively exciting, I suppose, an exciting day at the office. It's enormously challenging for Rachel Reeves for all the reasons that Rachel just set out. The government's whole stall was growth, effectively, because it knew that without growth, think of all the difficult decisions that the government has already asked Labour MPs to make. Many of these MPs have been elected for the first time. They've got, on paper, the largest parliamentary majority Labour has ever had. What have they had to do? They've means-tested the winter fuel allowance. They have retained the two-child benefit limit. They have not paid compensation to the WASPy women. All of these sort of controversial spending decisions, and that's just their first 6 months. And now these figures have come in, and it's suggesting that none of that has worked. And, in fact, the only thing they have to look forward to for the next year, 2 years, is more of the same. Now, Rachel Reeves is doing, it's worth saying, some really good things on growth, if the government goes through with it. The plan on nuclear power, very good. But stuff like that is long-term strategic stuff. It takes years to pay off. It'll take more than the lifetime of this Parliament and maybe the next Parliament to get those power plants up and running, assuming they do.
I mean, that's what Keir Starmer told our political editor, Beth Rigby, in an interview, that, they were never going to turn it around in 6 or 7 months.
No, they were never going to turn it around in 6 months, and they have, as Henry said, started to make some of the decisions. Planning reform is a really important one. Just the change in attitude when it comes to bureaucracy and the kind of things that can hold up and sort of much needed infrastructure development. All of that is important and significant. But I think the dangerous position for Rachel Reeves is that it is starting to look like decisions that she made in the budget to try and stabilise the financial footing of the government have in a way made things worse. And I think that there is another danger area here, which is the government's employment rights bill, that is another sort of flagship piece of legislation that they're really, really keen to push through. And in addition to the warnings from business leaders about the rise in employer national insurance contributions and the rise in the minimum wage, there are also concerns about some of that regulation, which is kind of core to Keir Starmer's whole sort of ethos about what's gone wrong with the country. It's core to Rachel Reeves and her securonomics agenda that she talked about lots in opposition, and that's going to be a real kind of clash as well if it looks like that could further limit the growth potential.
I mean, obviously, the Daily Mail mentioned the budget on their front page. Let's just look at the front pages of the Mail. Here it is, new year of stagflation. If we can also then have the front page of the Guardian, please, because they use the same word. Not often that the Guardian and the Daily Mail go with, a sort of similar, at least similar word. Fears over stagflation as Reeves' growth plan suffers double blow.
Yes, stagflation. Properly exciting stuff. If you missed the 70s the first time, you get to do it now. Basically, that describes the abysmal situation where your economy is simultaneously shrinking, or at least not growing, and suffering from severe inflation. And that is what the Bank of England is worried about, which is why it's done that rate cut, because they're forecasting that the inflation pressures are going to kick up again. And obviously, that hugely increases cost of living pressures across the board, because inflation, it corrodes the buying power of wages. It pushes up the cost of energy, food, fuel, everything. And again, if you're the government, that's the really frightening thing for you, is you can't, as a government, get out of it if people generally, after 5 years, feel poorer. You can lose on all kinds of individual issues. You can make enemies of specific constituencies. But if you, as a government, are presiding over a public that just feels poorer than it did 5 years ago, you're done. And I think that's what will be really keeping Starmer and Reeves up at night at this point.
But so what do you think the government could do, Rachel?
Well, first, I just want to make a point on the stagflation that Mel Stride, who is Shadow Chancellor, has tried to make starmflation a word. And
Is it working?
I struggled to say it just then. So
Stop trying to make starmflation.
stop trying to make starmflation happen. I think planning reform, like getting new houses built, is like one of the few things that doesn't cost a lot of money to do and could be completed in this Parliament. They're also hoping that some of the long-term measures that they're taking, OK, we won't have a new runway at Heathrow until 2030, 2045, whatever, but they're hoping that just knowing that it will happen, the business certainty will help crowd in private investment, help create jobs, and that having a clear plan of where the infrastructure is going to come from and having a government that's committed to it will give confidence to business investors both in the UK and abroad, and that will help drive some of the growth before the next Parliament. But Henry's right, people have to see their living standards at least going in the right direction, otherwise they will argue what's the point.
It has to be said that this is obviously our domestic financial and economic situation at a time when the international outlook is incredibly volatile, both with wars still ongoing and the fear of what Donald Trump might do when it comes to tariffs in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he did indicate, or at least I say he indicated, how much do you know about what Donald Trump is really thinking about anything? But he did indicate that he thought the UK problem was solvable. So I am hoping, hope that the government does as much buttering up as needs to be done to shelter us from the Donald's wrath.
Let's take a look at the Daily Telegraph now, because they have a slightly different take, obviously, still the same story. But here they mentioned the bloated state harming the economy. Basically, Andrew Bailey said an increase of 500,000 workers in the public sector has not been matched by productivity.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out that a lot of the increase in those public servants, people working for the state, happened under the previous Conservative government, which...
Yes, it did.
Well, I just think the Telegraph doesn't really mention that. So there's a lot of... It's a bloated state. It's a bloated state, which, various past Conservative prime ministers were in charge of. Huge increase in the size of the state under Boris Johnson. And you can argue that, a lot of that was to do with COVID and the pandemic. You could also argue that that didn't make things hugely productive. But there is a challenge here for the government because... one of the first things it did was the pay deals for the public sector workers, and it argued that we needed to do those, one, because strikes are absolutely debilitating to the economy, and two, because just strong public services, particularly public health services, but also transport, are really important to productivity and people being able to run businesses and to get to work and all the rest of it. If it looks like inflation is at a point where those public sector unions are going, that money isn't enough, that kind of looks like a sort of loss in the negotiating position, particularly as the government made this point that, we have to do this because of strikes. And if it looks like strikes might come back because of inflation, there isn't really an easy way for the government to get around that.
And the other thing to bear in mind, flying the blue standard a bit, because obviously you took my wonderful thing about Rachel Reeves doing the union pay deals. The specific thing that she did is she made them unconditional. Right? What you could have done in those circumstances is you could say, OK, we're going to do these pay settlements, which are going to be very, very expensive. They used up basically all of the government's initial fiscal wriggle room, but they're conditional on reforms, right? We want productivity increases, we want reforms to working practices. And I think what the government can really be indicted for, because you can argue it either way on the actual settlements, the fact that they made them unconditional to just get them done as quickly as possible means that now, when we get stories like this, which is basically Andrew Bailey saying, part of the problem is productivity in the public sector is woeful and it accounts for more of the economy. Part of that is the government's fault, and because it didn't use the leverage it had in those negotiations to try and drive through reforms.
Do you see them making any U-turns coming up?
On what?
On anything.
On anything.
I see them being tougher on the unions, actually. I think that the messaging is very much, the message to the unions is going to be, we gave you what you wanted up front, you're not getting any more. And I think that is a line that Rachel Reeves in particular is very, very keen to hold. But that is going to further antagonise and upset Labour backbenchers who are more sympathetic to the trade unions perhaps than the government is.
The biggest obvious one that they're going to U-turn on is their promise on tax. Rachel Reeves, after she broke her promise on tax the first time, she said, this is our fiscal plan for the entire Parliament. Now, fuel duty. Every government has said that it's going to increase fuel duty next year for the last 14 years, including Rachel Reeves. If she doesn't, 4 billion back hole in her figures automatically. 2028, the Casey review is going to come back with the social care plan, which Labour is presumably going to have to fund. That's not currently accounted for in any government financing. And if tax receipts continue to fall because the economy is woeful and the government won't make big cuts to pensions, social care, or any of the big spending issues, which would be extremely difficult, they'll have to raise taxes again. So that's the big U-turn that I expect we'll get in this Parliament.
OK, we're going to have to leave it there for now. Henry, Rachel, stay with us. Coming up, do lazy people live longer? We'll discuss that next, if we can be bothered. We can.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters.
We love Trump!
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important, it's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was the president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor. Free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people.
Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me now in the studio, Henry Hill and Rachel Cunliffe. Let's go to the Telegraph. Front page there, a story about Ed Miliband and his plan to spend £22 billion on unproven carbon capture technology is now being called a high-risk gamble. Why, Rachel?
I'm not sure about this without having seen page 19 of the Telegraph, but I do know that carbon capture technology has been around for quite a long time. Norway has been using it since, I think, 1996, since the mid-90s. David Cameron had a huge plan about investing carbon capture technology as a big part of Britain's sort of decarbonisation. The idea is that along with sort of dirty fossil fuel power generation, you can kind of suck the carbon out of the process and either bury it and store it or use it in other processes. And it's kind of quite a core part of what Ed Miliband was trying to do when he was last in government.
So, yeah, what it says here is the Commons Public Accounts Committee said the technology had never been tested and may not work. Henry.
I mean, so we have to assume, again, having not seen page 19, that maybe there's some novel method that's being used here or some novel technology. I think that the bigger thing, though, is simply the prospect of it being added to household bills, because, of course, the plan is to recoup a lot of the cost of this by putting it onto energy bills. And given that whatever the merits of this policy, it's not an energy generation policy, that could end up being a pressure on households. Now, obviously, this will take years to pull off, but again, a tricky story at a point when the government is dealing with a cost of living crisis and inflation.
Yeah. Let's take another look at another story regarding the government, still from page of the Telegraph. The PM axes bid to reform sick note culture. And Rachel, this is all about who actually gets to write the sick note.
Yes, this is a Conservative policy to take, you feel like you're too unwell to work, you go to the GP signs you off for work and your employer has to pay for a certain amount of time, or you end up on out of work, sickness, benefits. This was a plan to have this sort of devolve to work specialists rather than GPs, which is obviously quite controversial because it would mean people who are not medically trained professionals making assessments about people's medical conditions. This is, I think, part of the government trying very much to get the sickness bill benefit bill down, but to do so by trying to help and encourage and solve some of those long-term health conditions that mean people can't work, rather than taking a more punitive approach and going, yeah, your GP says you're sick to work, but we don't trust them. This other person that we have employed has designated you fit to work, so off you go.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it's a gatekeeping problem. The government has this all over the shop, which is, if you go into a GP, obviously, not saying every GP letter is unwarranted or anything like that, but there's always the temptation personally to be like, oh, OK, well, you're my patient, I'm your GP, I'll write you a sick note, right? And those individual nice gestures and human relationships, they add up to ballooning bills everywhere. GP sick notes, welfare payments, all kinds of things. If the government introduces a super special payment that's only meant to go to a small number of people, 5 years down the line, it's going to an awful lot of people, because the individual officers making those decisions, they're not responsible for the macro picture. They're just making the decision in front of them. It's a huge decision. I don't know. This decision to try and not control the cost this way might be another U-turn.
OK. 40 seconds for the final story. Daily Star front page. Boffins, lazy gits live longer. He also looks happy, that guy in the picture.
Yeah, the
dog and the beer.
The dog looks less happy, I think. But it says that relaxing on the sofa and having a good sleep...
That's not lazy. That's
can help you live an extra 10 years. And I am all for us having as much sleep as possible, particularly because we don't get off the show until midnight, do we?
No, that's true. I mean, the other thing is it says not overdoing it. But definitionally overdoing it is bad. That's why it's overdoing it.
Yeah. And unhealthy.
So maybe page 5 is full of some fascinating, I don't know, fascinating scientific deep dive, but it seems, sleep's good.
And it definitely does not say that going to the gym is bad for you. Like at the top of just been to the gym, loser. It's like, no, going to the gym and then also getting a good night's sleep.
We have no idea what's on page 5.
We don't. We'll find out Monday, possibly. Henry, Rachel, thanks for that. I'll see you in the next hour. Now let's take a quick look at the weather. A cold easterly flow has developed, lasting into next week, but there'll be a good deal of dry weather around. Most places will start dry tomorrow, but southeast England will see a few showers. It'll be chilly with a patchy frost in the clear and calmer north and west, along with some fog. Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland will have plenty of sunshine, though, this morning, once the early fog lifts. Elsewhere, it will be cloudier, windier and colder, with showers taking over more of southeast England, some wintry on the hills. There'll be a noticeable wind chill in the south. The afternoon will see showers spreading west. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, the Bank of England cuts the interest rate to 4.5%, but paints a gloomy picture for the UK economy. More details at the top of the hour.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.